Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. This is Dennis, and today I am with Dr. Jim Czarnik. How are you doing today?
Dennis, I'm doing great, and we'll make things simple. I'm just Jim. People who know me as just Jim, who offers people hugs as a form of welcome. So Jim is just fine. Thanks.
Perfect.
Good to be here. How are
Perfect.
you?
I'm doing great. Since I wouldn't say it's the first time you've been on the podcast, because I've stolen some of your talks and put them up. But if you wouldn't mind just doing a real quick introduction to yourself.
Sure. My name is Jim. I am currently retired from the U.S. Army. And I spent a lot of my life in the special operations world as well as in the kind of clinical world, bouncing back and forth, and then in the conventional world as well. I retired in 2023, just almost 2 years ago, but was very much involved in, of course, the GWAT, and I took more and more senior staff positions or command positions kind of throughout, and so I got insight into how the big system works. I ended my career as the command surgeon for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg.
Perfect. Well, I know you're the perfect guy to talk to because what I want to talk to you about is one of your talks. When I first saw it, it was at SOMSA 2020, I believe. And it was winning in a complex world. And during that time, Afghanistan was still rolling. Iraq was still rolling. And there was probably not much of an end in sight. But some of us were actually thinking beyond that. And now it's getting really close to time to pay the piper. Have there been much changes, since? The big concepts, governments, organizations all working together and for, one team, one fight kind of thing. Now, being on the ground, I don't really see much of a difference. It seems like everybody's still stuck in their silos and we kind of play lip service to integration. So an example, even just the medical system of the military and the operational system of the military, like we're all wearing camouflage, but I really don't think, or it doesn't feel like there's a lot of actual crosstalk about if you want to accomplish this, you're going to need to be able to do this. On the operational side, this is what is the mission? This is what we're going to have to do. I don't really feel like there's a lot of communication and actual understanding between the two. Do you think I'm completely wrong with this?
I think it depends on what level the engagement is happening at. For less experienced people or less seasoned people, there's, I think, as a whole, less communication and less understanding. Over the course of time, as you work in more diverse jobs, and that specifically, in a very specific sense, means the operational people get off the team and go work someplace else, like on a staff, right, at the Pentagon as a liaison, and the medical folks do the same thing. They get out of the hospital, right, and they go to an operational unit, and then they actually engage as a soldier who may or may not just be a senior NCO or an officer, and then actively engage outside of the medical section. That awareness becomes greater. I think if you want to talk about at the company or the battalion level, yeah, for the most part, there is still very much a a lack of appreciation for what both sides do. I think it's important, at least from Jim's standpoint, to remember that the medical departments of the services, they exist for one reason. Medicine exists to serve the line. If the line didn't exist, the medicine wouldn't exist, right? And so we need to remember that we are an important cog, but let me, instead of cog, right, I say gear. And when I think of gear, think of a very, very precise, finely tuned Swiss watch or Rolex watch. Every gear must be working perfectly with the next one to keep perfect time. And so don't think of yourself, well, I'm just a cog in the machine. Well, if you're a gear in that kind of machine, you're pretty critical. It doesn't matter how small that you are, right? But medicine exists to serve the line in the military, right? And so when the commander at a smaller unit doesn't understand, right, or we sense that they don't understand, we have to keep in mind, okay, our task is to fulfill the commander's orders, right? Now, if the commander doesn't see or doesn't perceive, or we believe they don't perceive something important, then it's our job not just to try to go and beat them about the head with a stethoscope, right, or choke them with a cravat. It's to go, hey, ma'am, hey, sir, I'm going to ask if you would try to take a look at the world from my perspective, right? And more importantly, say to the commander, sir, ma'am, would you please help me understand where you see me as a senior NCO who happens to understand medicine, but as your medical right point, what do you expect out of me? And where do I fit in the level of importance? And that's something I think that we fail to do regularly, is to have that honest discussion with them. Otherwise, we just keep interpreting their actions and going, well, they hate medicine, man. They don't, right? Well, when was the last time you said to them, sir, please help me understand? Where do I fit in? Right? And so at the tactical level, yeah, there's kind of a lack of understanding or an appreciation. But remember, we're all at that level going at it from our lane, if you will, right? And the commander's trying to focus all of the lanes because the engineer's coming to them going, you don't understand. These bangalores are really important, and we have to have training time on the range, right? And the logisticians are saying, you just can't pull water and food out of your ass, right? It takes time, and you got to coordinate this, right? And the two folks are going, ma'am, you're missing the boat, right? You're missing the enemy's most likely course of action, right? So we just have to understand that we're just vying for time, and commanders as a whole are going to give their attention toward the squeaky wheel that's underperforming.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But I mean, what I'm thinking, we have our medical commands, right? Not just group or regiment, etc., but like the joint trauma system, etc., going up. And, they're given a task of like, how is medicine going to look in LISCO, in whatever future conflict is going to take place. And so they are saying, okay, medics are going to have to get smarter. They're going to have to get better. Providers are going to have to get dirtier. They're going to have to be more tactical. They're coming up with their plans, but are they actually integrating those ideas into, with the perspective of a commander, a ground commander? You know what I mean? Because all those extra skills, that takes away from your base skills, because you're going to have to go get trained on it. You're going to have to be refreshed on it. You're going to have to practice on it. And so, like, I guess at a much higher level, are these communications actually happening, or is it just people having ideas and being vocal about it?
Yeah, great point. So, as you know, I'm on a number of chat groups and signal groups where a lot of these concepts are discussed. And I will tell you that my overarching sense is that we collectively, right, you have a small group of people who are really motivated and very well trained and have got a lot of experience, who are thinking about, who are tasked with setting up programs or expectations or training skills for the large force. But in fact, what they're doing is they're setting them up and thinking about themselves in that environment, right? And so they're going, how do I make this? I need to have this little bit extra skill, right? I'm already at the 98th percentile, so let's set up a system to get me further. And there is a loss of a focus that this is about the operational force, which means general purpose force, and then the basic special operations medic, right? Just coming out of the schoolhouse. And when you look at it from that perspective, we are very much unrealistic, in Jim Czarnik's humble opinion. And I only say that because in these chat groups, I'm routinely the guy kind of going, look, the emperor has no clothes here. You're missing the boat. Time is the currency. There is a finite amount of time. And remember, these people are soldiers who just happen to understand medicine, right? And your concept is right on point. Well, it's going to take time to learn more and more and more. We've been down this road many times in the past, right? And in fact, the Army Medical Department did make a really heroic attempt to expand the base level training and skill sets of the general purpose medic, right? Do you recall why it was shot down this last time? And the reason is they went to the FORCECOM commander, right? And they said, we really think you need this, and here are all the reasons, right? And they were great reasons. And the FORCECOM commander said, okay, well, how much more time is it going to take? And they said, well, it's going to take an extra 4 weeks. And his question was simple. Are you going to be able to still produce the same number of medics in the same amount of time? Because I have requirements to fill ranks because I'm a force provider. And they said, well, no, because it takes more time. And he said, well, sorry.
Right.
Right? It's really that simple.
Yeah.
But because we look at it from our little lane, right, we don't see the bigger picture. And and in my humble opinion, we are going way off the reservation in terms of when you talk about prolonged field care, this is not about specialty care. This constantly goes back to doing the basics better than anybody else. So then you can really extend there. Now, there are some skills based on technology that I think that we can incorporate, and ultrasound is one of those things, right? I would submit, though, that it shouldn't be a question of, can I teach and sustain this to medics? The real question is how is that going to change their actions, right? How will it force them to do one thing versus the other, or does it just make them feel good, right? So if I teach a medic or a physician or a nurse practitioner or a PA or a radioman, right? The commo guy who just happens to be cross-trained as an EMT, how to do a EFAST right on the abdomen and look for blood. Okay, so they've got blood in their abdomen. Look, I see it. I see it in Morrison's pouch, right? So what's the so what? Right? So
right.
Good.
You
now,
found
what
it.
are you going to do with that? And if you don't have a means to get them out anywhere because you're in the LISCO environment that we keep talking about, which is worth another discussion. But if you can't get them out, well, what's the so what?
You haven't changed your march yet.
Right. Unless you're really willing to change the whole dynamic. Unless you're willing to really start to have the conversation with the guy. You know what, brother, I got to tell you this up front. Your blood is pouring in your belly and we can't get you out. If I can't, what do you want me to tell your family? Right? So when was the last time we had that discussion about in general? Right? Or, so I do the FAST exam. Yep, they still have blood and it's getting larger. Well, if their belly hurt and their trauma was in their belly, I kind of knew the damage was in there. How much more information from the medic level, if you will, the tactical level, in terms of impacting your decision, is that ultrasound information giving you compared to what just measuring the strength of their pulse and the rate of their pulse? And so, again, this comes back to what are we going to focus our time on? Now, I'm not poo-pooing ultrasound, right? For me, if you really want to make use of ultrasound in that small tactical environment, it's easy enough to train someone to do a FAST exam, right? And just to say, okay, this adds to your information, but have the discussion with them up front. How is this really going to change your actions? If you really want to make use of ultrasound in a LISCO environment from Jim's perspective, right, we figure out ways that we can teach medics, right, or PAs or physicians who are not emergency medicine or anesthesia, how to do very simple, large area regional blocks for long-term pain control, so we don't have to snow somebody with parenteral, analgesia, right? If you want to make use of ultrasound there, now you're making an impact, right? And so for me, I would really like to see, look, let's make an ultrasound for dummies, for emergency medicine guys who can just go, right? I want to block the whole left lower extremity. Because that, right, guy's got a lost or mangled foot, and I got to do some debridement, or I want to run a bunch of fluid through there. And I'd like to give it to them for 8 or 10 hours so that I don't have to keep going back. Where do I inject?
Well, femoral and sciatic blocks is what you're talking about, but yeah.
So, and I didn't get into those particular areas, but conceptually, that's really where I think you're going to find value in LISCO for that particular piece of technology.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
I definitely agree. And I mean, I think with the EFAST lung slide, can definitely change treatments. Is this an actual penetration into the chest? Is it not? If he's got no lung slide now, then his problem with respiratory rate or oxygenation has to do with something else. This is not, at least that's not the problem right here, right now. Doesn't mean it won't happen going forward, but right here, right now, that's not it. Potentially bladder ultrasound and finding a volume. Okay. That can help you with your fluid resuscitation, in lieu of a Foley. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, looking in Morrison's pouch or, around the spleen. Yeah, you found it. Great. Now you still haven't changed your march of like giving blood, giving TXA, giving calcium potentially, which is still seems like it's a question mark now. You haven't really changed anything. You just found out where it is.
So I think that, and by the way, when I say we've gone off the reservation, I do not want to mean that the folks working in the Army Medical Department or the JTS, right, that they're not wonderful people who are really giving their all, and there are great ideas there. There are great people there that I can't hold a candle to.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
And we don't know what we don't know, right? Because they're seeing at a different optic. But I will tell you that, when we refer to the White Tower, and let's just take Army medicine for a second, right? We go, well, why aren't they helping more in the operational environment? Okay, well, have you stopped to think about that the Army Medical Department is one of the most complex commands in the Army, right? It's got a force, it is like IMCOM because they're managing all their own installations, right? It's not IMCOM coming in and managing the hospitals, et cetera. They're all doing that for themselves, right? They have a logistics footprint and a requirement that they must manage that is, equivalent to Siemens in the civilian world. They've got about 800 different patents, and they're doing hundreds of different research projects at any given time, right? And by the way, they're tasked with taking care of not only the active duty member, their dependents. But then they have a forced commission of also going to war, right? And so when we say, well, the Army Medical Department should be more operationally focused, okay, what are you willing to give up, right? So coming back to the same question of, hey, there's only so much time in a day. And remember, there's only so much money in a budget. And routinely, we don't get a budget in the beginning of the first quarter. If we're lucky, we get it by the second quarter. But often we're tasked to obligate funds only in the third quarter, but we have to obligate it for the whole year, right? And so when we say they don't get it, my question is, well, I think they do. What are you willing to give up? And yeah. But going back to that whole perspective of, do we talk well enough at the lower levels? We don't know what we don't know. We are so concerned with being successful, and because we don't know our jobs well, right? We get really laser focused. At the higher levels, I think there is understanding. There are different priorities, right? And commanders are going to give attention to those things that are going poorly, or that they believe as part of their vision is going to have a huge impact on their larger command. And so, when was the last time that medicine failed for them?
Well, I think it's almost perception, you know. You look at the Civil War or World War I, where thousands of people were dying, in a day. Well, that's kind of war. You look at GWAT, where we moved Earth to facilitate a rapid transport of a soldier, completely different. Like, yes, of course, unfortunately, soldiers died. That's also part of war. But I think the perspective of, I can throw enough money, I can throw enough manpower, I can throw enough stuff at this problem, and we're going to get it done. That's how I think I won't say we fixed modern medicine in a deployed environment, is we just went, chest deep into the problem and put the entire might of the U.S. economy behind it. And lo and behold, we won.
Yep.
I think you do that against another adversary who also has an economy, who also has that kind of time and manpower and money. Things start to look a bit different.
Yeah. Two important concepts here. The first one is, when you think back to that winning the war, winning in a complex world, and remember, that was Jim's interpretation of trying to present what Tradoc kind of had said at the time of, what are our challenges. Remember, we talked about that you can never possibly train for every scenario, right? The goal is that in order to win, one's rate of adaptation must be equal to or greater than the rate of change going on around them. Now, that concept of adaptation or adapting to the environment, right? Based on what you said, and with regard to the GWAT from a medicine standpoint, Jim routinely will say, we didn't adapt to the environment. We simply adapted the environment, right? We built large hospitals. We built large EMS systems, right? And big patient movement, because we had air superiority, right? We had a lot of money, and we could work and move in an environment that was really unconstricted or was permissive, right? And so, in that environment, of course, you can set things up and solve it. So we didn't adapt to the environment, right? We adapted the environment. When we talk about LISCO, which, Jim had, I understand the concept. I do routinely talk with people who go and say, okay, who is our near peer that we're going to go to war with in LISCO? Right? And so, what is it? Is it Russia? Well, I would then just submit, are they really a near peer? Right? So imagine if we took the full weight of the U.S. military, the joint force, right, and actually unleashed some of our electronic warfare, right, that we have, we just don't use because we don't show, right? What does Jim know? But at least based on the history we're seeing in Ukraine, right? They're not a near peer, right? They have nukes and they have global influence, especially in Europe. But from a military construct, from Jim's standpoint, they're not a near peer. Well, then who else? Well, we talk about North Korea, and then we talk about China. Well, let's just address the China issue. We don't want to go to war with China, and China doesn't want to go to war with us, because China needs us for their economy to buy their stuff, right? Yeah. So then we say, well, why are we worried about China? Well, it's in case they go and try to take Taiwan. Look, if they make a full-fledged assault on Taiwan, right? We collectively, our forces in the short run are going to lose, right? Because they're in the short run, because they're going to electronically disrupt us back at home so we can't power project, and our masses are going to go crazy because our Wi-Fi isn't working and our gas pipelines aren't working, and right, they're going to disrupt us at home, and then they're going to mass forces in a very small area. And I don't, in that environment where there's a lot of water, I don't see a lot of prolonged field care, right? Because aircraft are going to crash into the ocean, and then, or the ships are going to get sunk, and there's not a lot of prolonged field care there, right there. We're not going island hopping there.
I think if you're talking between China and Taiwan, yes.
Yeah.
I think you're talking China to Taiwan. I guess the fear is it goes from China to Taiwan to the Philippines to Japan to all down that Southern Asia.
Yeah. So from Jim's perspective, and again, I'm not one of the great strategic thinkers or operational thinkers, but I do pull myself back from thinking just in terms of army, right? So look, when we talked about the other aspects of implements of national power, right, and DImE, right? Remember that China has got to import food in order to survive, right? And they have to import fuel in order to survive, right? Well, guess what? If we just do a naval blockade of China's ports, right, they're going to die on the vine, right? So we and our allies still have a pretty powerful naval presence, right? And if it goes to a war conflict setting, right, then it's all out war. Well, then guess what? We deny them food, we deny them power, right? The social fabric of China will crumble because the daily needs from Maslow's hierarchy, right, will not be met. The people then will start to riot. And then China, right, the cultural fabric of China will disintegrate. And so, again, that's just one guy thinking, but I just think that LISCO is an important concept because of technology's ability to interrupt our abilities to move patients and to provide and to sustain large numbers of casualties, right? The way that we prevent large numbers of casualties in LISCO is we use the same types of technology to prevent large numbers of people from being on the ground, right? So instead of, right, taking out the MLRS system, right now we're thinking is going to take out a battalion because it takes out a grid square. Well, from a technological standpoint, we're not going to put a battalion on the ground there. We're going to put some of their autonomous or semi-autonomous capabilities. Anyways, I don't want to give the sense that I'm that this could never happen. Absolutely right, we could. From the U.S. perspective, the real concern, if the U.S. goes all in on one of those fights, the real concern is the use of nukes, right, by either the enemy or by us, right? Because if the waves of North Koreans start pouring over, right, doesn't matter if you got your clackers ready, there's just too many of them, right? And the amount of artillery tubes, etc. Anyways, so I think when we talk about LISCO, what that really should cause us to do is go back to the basics again and focus on how are we going to adapt in that environment. And when I have conversations with folks in Ukraine who are doing medical work, right, I've asked them, don't focus so much on the types of patients that you've had. I'd like you to keep a diary and focus on how you're adapting your day-to-day techniques, right? What are you using for paint control? What are you using for irrigation? If you're underground, where's your water supply coming from? How are you getting resupply? Are you reusing bandages at all? And if so, how are you cleaning them? What are you sterilizing them with? Right? The regular instruments you're using. Are you getting brand new pre-sealed packs of disposable instrument packs? Or are you reusing them? And if so, how? If we really want to train for LISCO, the US, I would say we do one thing first before we do anything else to see the impact it's going to have us. And that is we do an FTX or do a large JRTC without any cell phones, right? When was the last time you did an FTX or went to the field without a cell phone?
Before there were cell phones.
Exactly, right? But now we can't live without them, but they're signaling and targeting systems for the enemy, right? We know this, right? But we don't train for it. And that's a very inexpensive way to force people to adapt. Now, you don't have to take away all cell phones, just take away the SIM cards so they're not transponders, right? So using it as a reference tool with power is great. You just have to make sure you understand your electromagnetic spectrum and how much you're giving off to keep those things charged. But it's that ability that has just infiltrated every part of our life. Those are the aspects, in my humble opinion, that we should be training on, right? Don't go with your cell phones, right?
I think we give those things a lot of lip service, but we don't really do anything about it.
Yeah.
You know, like we measure those things. Like, what kind of signature does my butterfly ultrasound give off? Well, now you know a number. Now what? Like, you don't do anything with it.
Right. So the intent is pure, but I think that the impact, we're putting too much energy into small things, right? You've heard me say this before, but look, let's go on an FTX and just take water out of the stream and use an iodine tablet, right? Well, when was the last time you purified water that way for any length of time?
Yeah. It's been a long time. It's been a long time.
When you went through Robin Sage,
yep,
where
definitely.
did you get the water that you drank from?
A lake.
Right? I mean, look, if we want to train for LISCO, we have to think in those kind of terms, and we have to have hard decisions. If you want to talk about large-scale casualties and the inability to take care of them, then what we really need to do is say, this means I'm really going to have to do triage, right? And what that means is we individually, those people who are going to be forced to do triage, have better think through it. And the moral dilemmas inside of us. We better come to terms with those before we really have to do it, to at least get a more secure footing and framework. In our units, we need to have hard conversations, right? And one of my positions is, if we know that blood is life-saving, because we do when it comes to injury on the battlefield and preventing the lethal triad, right? Whole blood is what is life-saving. If I genuinely say to somebody, or I make a decision and say they are expectant, right? What I've said is I'm going to utilize the least amount of equipment and supplies as I can because I cannot save them. I've made that decision. That decision is done, right? Now, in my humble opinion, we better have the conversation with all the members at a minimum on our ODA or in our platoon about, if it comes down to that, brother, right? If Dennis says to Jim, there may come a time when you're injured so badly, I cannot save you. Or me trying to save you would cost 6 other people to lose their life. Would you be willing, if that was the case, to offer your blood to the other 6 members, right? And that's a discussion we have to have before we are ever in duress, so that the individual can have with their family. I would submit to you that if we raised that question in those terms, if we went to your members on an ODA and said, if I was forced to say you're expectant because you're injured so badly, would you be willing to give your blood, knowing that it may hasten your death, right? But I made the decision that I can't save you anyways. Would you be willing to donate your blood, give your blood so other members on your team could live? What do you think most people's answers would be?
Oh, I'm almost guarantee they're going to say yes, do it.
Right. So have we had that discussion?
Not really.
No. We've talked about zombie blood. Look, it ain't zombie blood. It's my brother's blood. Right? And the question is, are we willing to carry out that warrior's will? And think about, again, if I'm going to go to Valhalla and I'm waiting for my brothers to meet me in Valhalla, right? Who are they going to be buying drinks for first in Valhalla? Right? So this is just a different perspective, but those are the kind of discussions that I think. Now, I understand up front that there's a lot of scientific and study that needs to be done to say, okay, at what point is the cost benefit of taking blood from somebody who may already starting to be acidotic, right, a little bit, etc. But it's just like when patients go into septic shock, right? You start the pressors early. Don't let that be a last decision.
And I think that's, with that particular topic, that's the real sticking point, is triaging somebody as expectant early enough that it's not blatantly obvious you're not going to win. In that aspect, I think training wise, we're not that great at.
No.
Because I think there's multiple things. One, just the training aspect. 2, then you have the human aspect of, I will never give up. And as somebody who's been through it, I guarantee you that is the thing that is beaten into you You will never give up. There is always an answer. You're just either smart enough or not smart enough to have figured it out. But that's not really reality. And I don't think we necessarily train always to reality for that. So I could easily see you're in that horrible situation. You end up having that conversation, but the time to actually have a good effect on the people that you could save is gone.
Yep. And I would submit that is simply a failure of us individually to get over and work through our own moral dilemma, right? And the time to do that is when you're not in crisis. The time to do that is to work through mentally, stoically, and emotionally, right, where that conflict occurs in each one of us, and to come to terms with it. And a really good starting point for all of this is try as we might, we're all in this thing we call life together, and no one's getting out alive, right? So the end state is already clear and predetermined. When it happens is different. And so yes, that's one of the areas that we don't talk about enough. Okay. You also talked a little bit about how does the medic individually we understand the DImE, the capital D, the capital I, the small m and E, diplomatic, information, military, and economic. How do we as medics kind of embrace that or utilize that or leverage that? Interestingly enough, it fundamentally comes down to understanding language, or the different language in different systems and constructs, right? So as medics or as soldiers, we're very good at working within our ODA and maybe the company. But even just in the Army, right, if you go from an ODA to First Special Forces Command, there's stuff going on up at that level that you don't know the phraseology, you don't know all the acronyms, etc. And that's still in the green tab or the green beret world, right? We're not talking the larger USASOC, and we're not talking the larger Army or the Joint Force, right? So it's understanding the vocabulary and then the different constructs or how systems are set up. And I don't know why that happened in the background there, but it did.
It was a good point.
So what we need to understand is really how, or from a military standpoint, the medic should understand that, look, the State Department and the Department of Defense have been working together for decades. And in our national security strategy, we are directed at the very highest levels to work together, right, to ensure the security of the nation, right? The State Department does a lot on the diplomatic side, and part of that comes through their efforts in assisting other nations, right? Now, the military part of us says, yes, that means we do foreign military sales, and we're going to go and train them how to use their equipment. Yes, but no, right? There's so many other aspects to what they do. And so when we stop to say, well, you know what, I actually need to understand what happens in an embassy, right? what is the purpose of an embassy? And who's in charge there? Right? Well, just the simple understanding from the military person who just happens to be medical, you, just because you're in the military and you're used to being in charge, remember this is an environment that you're not in charge and you have no authority whatsoever because you're going into a sovereign nation, right? In the same way that the U.S. Army can't legally just go in someplace and say, I'm going to take over New Orleans because they need our help. It don't work that way. You've got to be requested and then authorized, and then all of your activities need to be approved before you even do them. And they get approved by a civilian authority. And an embassy that works in a foreign nation, right? Who is the ultimate approval authority in that nation? It's the senior leader in that nation, the prime minister, the president, whoever. And the only person inside of that foreign nation that can approve U.S. activities is the ambassador, right? And so when the military comes in to work into a different nation, the ambassador's got to approve all those activities. It makes sense then that inside every embassy, there is a defense attaché. There is a military liaison that works day to day inside that embassy. And then there is a cooperation division, often if there's larger engagements, that's going to have a larger military liaison cell, if you will, right? So how do you work through there? Well, first and foremost, you go in and you say, may I please speak with someone in the defense attaché's office, right? You introduce yourself and let them know you're coming in, right? So we don't do engagement fratricide. Well, you guys are coming in. The Air Force was just here last week. What are you here to do? Or we're going to train TCCC. Well, they just did the same thing last week. And if we're failing to talk, right? So from the medic standpoint, understand that the authority in a sovereign nation to engage in any activity comes through the ambassador. And the way that you discuss with the ambassador from a military standpoint is you work through the defense attaché, the senior military person that's stationed inside of that embassy. And they have a whole country plan, right? They're routinely working on the 50-year plan, though, whereas the military folks are kind of working on the 50-day plan.
Yeah. As long as my deployment, that's as far as I care.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we start to understand that larger plan, we get a sense of how we can support that plan. The thing at a minimum we don't want to do is disrupt or run at odds with that country's strategy already, because the geographic combatant commander for that area has also got a senior State Department rep, SES2 level person, working on their staff, helping guide their decisions, right? So it's really about being informed about what is already laid, what is the groundwork being laid there. And if, let's just say you're an ODA and you're going to be tasked with going to South Africa or to the African continent or to South America or Europe, right? You're going to engage through the TSOC, the Theater Special Operations Command, right? And you should be asking them, would you please provide me with what the GCC's country plan is, right? What is their country plan for engagement? So you understand the time horizon and what are the areas that they are really focusing on. and then you support those. And if you are actively going with that knowledge, you're going to win as long as you engage on those topics. But if you go in and you just go, hi, I'm Jim, I'm a medic, how can I help? They're going to go, oh shit, here's another person I got to,
I got to spin up.
I got to herd cats. Right? Yep. Does that make sense, Dennis?
It does, absolutely. You would think when they task a small group to go do a thing, those coordinations would already be done, and our goals and our mission would be already in line. Mm-hmm. Not to put the effort of coordination on staff sergeant, but it went to, command sergeant major or commander. We already did that.
Right. So this is why, right, you have a whole defense cooperation section that exists in TSOCs and exists in GCCs. And one of the reasons that coordination doesn't happen by the command sergeant major, but is left up to the staff sergeant, is because the command sergeant major has spent all of their time just in the tactical world in that one unit and has never stepped out far enough to understand how the rest of the Army works. Right? And so if as a medic, you really want to understand the system, be willing to get off a team for a while.
Ah, that's heresy.
I know. But look, eventually we all get promoted out of the fun jobs. And the question is now, are you an asset or just an ass?
Guys not leaving group, guys not moving up. Essentially, and the entire ethos is kind of built around, like, you stay on the team, you stay under the ruck as long as you possibly can, because that's where all the fun happens. It kind of takes like a more mature, longer thinking person to voluntarily take these occupations versus, like, you've been wounded or you've been broken in some way, and now you're kind of forced to find a different job.
So you are absolutely right. It takes a degree of maturity, and I would say a step further, it takes a degree of awareness of the greater system. And if we can inculcate the idea that it's not about you, right? It's about the total mission, the longevity of the relationships, the understanding of the bigger system, it allows you to leverage and shape, if you will, the environment much better than you just going in cold. If you don't have any idea of what the environment is like whatsoever where you're going into, you're essentially selling encyclopedias door to door, right? You're cold calling. Hi, this is me. Well, who are you? Well, this is who I am. Well, why are you talking to me? Well, because you're the first person I ran into. Well, that immediately screams you're not a professional. And if you want to be a quiet professional, then act and do the proper intelligence preparation of the battlefield, the IPB. This is doing a JSET and going into a sovereign nation. It's just a different battlefield, right? The minefield are the unknown cultural differences, right? Or the organizational differences that you're going to trip over, right? And then they're going to set up a trip flare that says, this guy has no idea what they're doing. And it doesn't take a lot of work to understand that concept, but it does take someone sitting you down just to go through an organizational design chart to say, here's how things work, right? And remember, when when we talk about using the instruments of national power, right? The diplomatic, information, the military, and the economic. It's a small m. And so there's the whole diplomatic part that's going on, which is what the embassy is doing as the direct line to the president. And then there are information operations going on all the time, right? And then there's economic, which is, right, are we giving you financial aid? Are we doing military sales to you? Are we supporting your HIV program in the country, right? All these aspects of where the U.S. is trying to leverage, right? Because remember, nations don't have friends. People have friends. Nations have interests. And so you just, as an individual who's going into that country, you need to understand the operational environment. So you need to understand what the U.S. interests have. Now, thankfully, the U.S. military makes this easier because we have geographic combatant commands. And that commander is responsible for all of that geography. And whatever in their footprint, they have a long-term plan of engagement. Now, part of that plan may be they're not important or they're less high on our priority list, so we're not going to spend as much time in there, right? Because we have interests. But if you're going someplace, that means that somebody requested you. And that request came up and through the Geographic Combatant Command for some purpose. And so before you ever step in that country, at a minimum, you should be reaching up, if you're in U.S. Army Special Operations Command, you should be reaching up through the TSOC, the Theater Special Operations Command, up into the GCC to say, could you please link me up with the NCOIC or the OIC of the country plan? Who wrote the country plan for the engagement plan for this nation? What's the intent, right? Because we're all trained, right, that you should know kind of 3 up and 2 down, right? Kind of all you want to know is what's the commander's intent, right? What's the mission or the vision? What's the end state? And what are the key tasks? So then you know how you fit in there, right? And all you're looking for is, okay, first GCC, do you have a plan? And they're going to have some plan. And then I think it's a double thumbs up that do it. Do you have a plan? What's your plan? And how well thought out is that, right? The other aspect that you need to understand is, remember, in the military, you constantly have turnover, right? Every 2 or 3 years, someone's leaving that job. So 33% of the population are moving their job unless you're the civilian. Well, guess what? Uniform wearing active duty member, you just want to make sure you're not looking down at that GS-13 who's working in that GCC, because they may well have been you 20 years ago who has now got 30 years of experience working in that area. You don't care who it is. You just want to know, what is the engagement plan for that area? What is your plan? And how have you vetted that with the other agencies of U.S. government, right? So through the State Department, what aspects do you have USAID going there? Do you have, there's relationships, Future Farmers of America will have engagements in countries. And the other thing that the active duty component needs to understand is that nation partnered with a National Guard element of a state? Because if they are, the closest relationships that you will find in that country is if there is a state that is already aligned, a U.S. state aligned with that country, and then their National Guard goes over there routinely, right? So the whole concept here is check your ego at the door. You're going to do a mission. You want to be the best informed as you can. Well, let's understand a little bit of the history of what's going on there, right? So you do that at the GCC level. You talk to the person or group that is in charge of the country plan. You find out why your particular task was set up, right? What is the end state? So if you get sent over just to teach basic rifle marksmanship, okay, cool. Why? Right? Is that because that nation wants to deliver a force as part of a United Nations peacekeeping force and they need to be trained to a certain standard? Right? Or is it, right? Who knows what the reason is, right? And then before you ever step in the country, you ask the people from the GCC, the liaison officer, and remember the GCC has got a platoon plus of foreign area officers assigned to them. This is a whole branch, a whole branch of the U.S. Army that's all they do for a living. They are foreign area specialists. And that foreign area officer inside the GCC will have direct contact, weekly at least, with the defense attaché, who is normally another foreign area officer working inside the embassy, right? And so you just want to go, hey, who's that guy or who's that lady, right? So I can talk with them. And then you make the phone call or you get in the skiff or whatever it is, right? So I'm sure you've heard the saying, you never want to go someplace for the first time, right? You do a map recon, some kind of a communications recon anyways, right?
Get as much information as you can from anything and everything.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so it's this kind of layering, if you will, kind of stepping back in the big picture, that if you do properly, prevents you from sprinting to failure. Right?
Which we sprint everywhere.
We sprint everywhere because we are in the land of perpetual surge. Right? Because nobody above us is willing to say, no, we can't do that. Right? Okay, so that's the way, though, that when you get this engagement plan or this task to go to a different country, you start actually doing the work. And you don't need to go to USASOC headquarters to say, you know, what is the infectious disease threat to that area, right? You call the embassy. And then you have the defense attaché or one of their members in that defense team talk with the senior health member in the embassy to say, what are the diseases, right? When people come in here, what are the 3 things that they routinely are suffering from? And they'll knock it off, right? They'll tell you. And then you ask the question before you even go there, right? Especially if you're a medical person. If the ambassador gets injured or is in a car accident, what hospital do you take them to and why? Right? And when was the last time you used that hospital? And who's your point of contact in that hospital? And when we fly in, do you have a handler that can meet us at the airport to facilitate our movement through customs? Right? But otherwise, Green Berets generally don't go anyplace without guns, but you go into countries with a bunch of rifle cases and a bunch of equipment, and then you go, hey, what do you mean it's going to be stuck in customs for the next 30 days? We're supposed to start training next week. Well, you didn't go through the right channels, right? Now you pop a star cluster from a 12-person ODA, right, that now ripples along diplomatic channels, right? And you don't look professional. And so that's how we should be engaging when we get a task to go in that area, because it's about information. You want to be well armed, and you are absolutely right. We need individuals who are willingly, or our system should mandate that they be pulled out of the tactical environment to get a higher level staff experience. And just about everybody goes kicking and screaming until they get there and realize, oh, I never knew this. Oh, I wish I would have known this 2 years ago. Well, I'd much rather you say, I wish I would have known this 2 years ago than 20 years ago. Right? So, yeah. Unfortunately, at the battalion and the group level, all those people, just about 98% of them, are still just wrestling with the day-to-day personnel issues that are coming up, right? We're supposed to send the ODA, but they're short a medic, or they only have one commo guy, and that's a junior commo guy. Well, how are we going to fill them? Well, this guy just got a DUI, so they can't go, or this guy's going through divorce, right? And that is the nature of the military, because that's life. There needs to be someone whose job is day to day to step out above that realm, if you will, to be that senior person to engage with. And you can always go to your higher headquarters, right? So if you're on an ODA, right, and you go to battalion and group is probably going to say, well, go to 1st Special Forces Command, right? Or the Ranger Battalion is going to say, hey, go to regiment, right? Or the civil affairs element, right, is going to say, well, go to group, right? And then they're going to push you up to USASOC. Now, that's fine, but at a minimum, you need to know, who do I talk with at USASOC?
It's a big building.
I mean, especially if you're at Fort Bragg, and it doesn't matter if you're at Fort Bragg or not, you got people talking with your higher headquarters every day. So I apologize. I know I've done a lot of talking there, but it's not rocket science. It is just kind of take a deep breath and step back. Right?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you gotta, I would imagine just pretty much any special operations person has the confidence within them to go talk to somebody. Like I tell my students, essentially since I started, you're willing to jump out of an airplane from 40,000 feet. You're willing to go into combat and get blown up or cut in half or any of the other horrible imaginative things you could think of. You're signed up to do that. However, you are afraid to go talk to that 50-year-old man who has asthma and can't run a 2-mile anymore a question.
And
that doesn't make sense.
So I will just use a phrase here that I developed out of my own life experience to help me better understand that resistance. The phrase I use is, do you have courageous vulnerability? Do you have the willingness to be courageous and make yourself vulnerable by saying, excuse me, I don't know? Right?
Those are two different things, yeah.
And if you train most of your life to jump out of an airplane or to go diving or to go shooting, right? I don't want to say it takes zero courage to do that, but we become socialized to do that. That becomes, we're going to do a halo jump. I guess that's just a slow Tuesday, right? But if I say, I want you to go to an area that you are unfamiliar with, you have never engaged in, and knock on the door and say, excuse me, my name is Jim. I need your help. I don't understand. Would you please help me understand? that forces you to make yourself vulnerable, because nobody in our community wants to be seen weak. Well, let me see. Are you really weak because you don't understand? Or what makes you weak is your unwillingness to admit you don't know it and get the information. And that same concept applies across the whole dynamic in our lives, right? So, hey, I don't know. Well, it's kind of uncomfortable because I got to go ask somebody I don't know and they're going to think I'm silly. They're not going to think you're silly. They're going to think you're one of the smart ones for actually taking a moment to come knock on the door. You're going to demonstrate your humility, right? To say, I don't know, and I need your help, right? Now, you can extend that throughout the whole, that same concept, quite frankly, over the whole aspects of your engagement in the military, right? You can say, oh, well, I don't know what kind of, is my U.S. license actually good if I go to, the Democratic Republic of the Congo? I don't know. What's my SOFA status there, right? But then you can extend that to just simply relationships day to day with other people, right? You're having a conflict with them, and rather than, right, hunkering down and being like, well, that guy, he's a butthead and he doesn't want to talk or he makes me uncomfortable. Do you have the courage to make yourself vulnerable and go, hey, I noticed that there's tension here, and I don't know if it's me, because if it is me, I'd like to understand, right? Well, how often do you do that? Now take that a step further. What about at home with your family, right? Or your spouse, right? When was the last time you said, I'm sorry, I failed?
Daily.
But you do that because of a sense of maturity. Now, 20 years ago, were you doing that?
Oh, hell no.
Oh, no. Not only no, but hell no, right? Now we take that one step further when we talk about many of our struggles who had fought for many years or had other things going on even before we joined the military with our behavioral health, right? And I say, okay, yes, it is. You demonstrate courage by being the first guy in the door kicking and doing CQB. And you've been doing that for 15 years professionally. Does that make you afraid when you do that? Or do you kind of look forward to that? Right? Now, if I say, how do you look at raising your hand and saying, I'm not dealing well with my kids or my family or the other people on the team, and from a behavioral standpoint, I'm the weak link in the chain. So I need someone to help make me stronger. Right? That's taking the armor off, and that's having the courage to make yourself vulnerable. That same concept applies across all these engagements.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, people don't look at you as being silly or weak or stupid. You demonstrate your character. It shouts your character when you do that to them. Just work it into your day-to-day life, right? So, because remember, the people who are working in the embassy, right? The people who are working in other government agencies, they're all doing the best they can with what they got on that particular day, right? And nobody's got it all figured out, right? And if you pretend like you really got it all figured out all the time, you're putting a lot of damn energy into your facade that you're maintaining all the time. That is wasted. Yep.
And it'll fold. It'll crack.
Yeah.
It'll crack eventually.
Yeah. And I think there's value. And the reason I kind of made that shift as we're talking about how do you engage with embassies is the real question is how do you engage with everybody? Right? Are you doing it honestly and from a place of humility? Are you reflecting on how much energy you put in day to day to kind of maintain your bravado or support your ego? Or are you actually willing to say, hey, you know what? I'm not the smartest guy about this. I would like to get smarter. Will you make me smarter, please? And yeah, so I think that when we talk about again, we're going to go back all the way back over to LISCO now, is right. What are we prepared for? Are we prepared for the right things in LISCO? So I think that the way that we are characterizing LISCO is there's a potential that could happen. I believe in my heart of hearts that LISCO is an attempt by the larger Army service to maintain resources, right? Because we may get asked to, deploy divisions again. I think the U.S. electorate, the voters currently are not really all that willing to do that right now because of what we just got done with. And so much of what we are going to face in future conflicts will be in the space and cyber realm. And our biggest enemies will be the disruption that those realms will cause on our day-to-day activities, right? And now we go back to, so maybe we should get in the habit of deploying to the field without our cell phones or without our SIM cards, right? How about we go to the field for a week with just whatever meals we're going to have and don't plan to go back to the rear at all, but we just use our regular radio comms, right? So that we can go, how well do these radios work, right? How often do they lose fill? And I'm going to go and I'm just going to, if I have to eat off the land, that's fine, right? Then we field strip an animal, right? And we cook it, right? So I think these are all the skill sets that we should be working on, in addition to the basic medical skill sets of, damage control resuscitation, preparing and minimizing the impact of shock before a person goes to damage control surgery, and recognizing that if we have to hold on somebody for the longest period of time, or for a longer period than we are expecting, it won't be about the fancy technology that you bring to bear, right? It will be about doing the basics very well, right? So some of the best training courses that I've helped with have, I remember doing some of these courses in Sweden, to be honest, is we had a patient, right? And some model, let's just say that was injured in a setting. We then had to move it into a civilian covered vehicle, right? We then moved it into an apartment complex with people living day to day in it. And we moved them in there and then had them run cycles of taking care of it for 12 hours. Are you doing ins and outs? Are you reassessing regularly? Are you making sure that you're turning the patient so they don't do bed sores, right? Have you implemented a sleep cycle among your own people so not everybody gets burnt out, right? And, are you making sure that, okay, I put a tourniquet on, but I reassessed it quickly and it doesn't need to be a tourniquet. So I've transitioned to some other pressure dressing, right? Am I splinting the patient appropriately, right? If I can, am I letting them use their own gut to eat or drink, right? Am I letting them urinate normally? Or do I have a Foley? Do I carry Foleys? Should I have Foleys or should I have Texas condom catheters, right? Just these are the concepts I think that are important. Now, I'm not going to minimize the importance of care under fire, right? Or tactical care or tactical evacuation care, right? Yes, you need to know if they have a tension pneumothorax, right? But PFC is not really about the tension pneumothorax, right? It's about, okay, I'm no kidding holding on to this dude for 12 or 18 hours, or I'm holding on to 15 or 20 people, and I don't have enough supplies.
I mean, prolonged field care, I think it assumes that you have already mastered the basics. You know, it assumes that you know how to assess a tourniquet and that the tourniquet should come down before 2 hours, roughly. Or be able to make an educated assessment and say, if I take this off, he might bleed to death. I'm not going to take it off. Mm-hmm. I'm weighing the risks and I'm choosing the best for the patient and myself and my resources, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's generally sums up actual prolonged field care as just a series of educated decisions based on the patient, based on logistics, but based on just people, time available. If you're doing continued operations, you probably don't have the ability to watch somebody as closely as you should. What are you going to do?
Right.
Can you plan for that and then get him to a place where he can, or maybe somebody else can watch him who isn't as educated? So, yeah, I think it's just a lot of very educated decisions to get to a good enough.
Yeah. So, again, I think it's wonderful and aspirational that we, as part of the military health system and the joint trauma system, we're looking to expand the scope and the capability of our medics. I just personally don't think that we can assume that all our medical providers have got the muscle memory down well simply to reassess a tourniquet regularly and to transition it to a pressure dressing. And I know from reading reports out of Ukraine and earlier reports out of the continent of Africa, right, that we've had issues in the past. And that's because of training scars. And so if I were to ask you, do you feel pretty comfortable that 95% of the conventional medics and soft medics are adept in their habits of reassessing tourniquets and transitioning them to pressure dressings or any kind of dressing if it's really needed?
I don't feel so, no.
Oh, not only no, but hell no, right? And it's not because they weren't well trained, right? But they weren't forced to be in an environment where they're like, no, check it again. No, check it again. That's what you do, right? First, you save life, then you save limb. Sorry about that. It is the two thumbs, right?
Yeah, that's okay.
I know I sound like a broken record, but it is our ability to adapt that will set us apart and allow us to be prepared and successful to the best extent that we can if we're really faced with prolonged field care. There's the other part of this that we don't talk about in prolonged field care either, right? The Brits actually do this much better than we, right? Is how much do we just sit down and talk with the patient if they're alert, right? The Brits would say, well, just sit down and share a cuppa with them, right? Just have a cup of tea because you want to kind of normalize this a little bit and work. It's so I think we need to just be very honest about, okay, what is the environment that we are creating or shaping for the patient in front of us? How much of our stress are we projecting onto them that then causes them to feel stress? And if they slip into unconsciousness, what is the last thought that they're going to be thinking about or hearing before they slip off? I don't want them to feel that it's stress, duress, chaos, craziness, right? And I think the more that we are willing to have those kind of honest conversations with each other and talk about that even in training, the more prepared we'll be able to do it in the real world, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, the courage, I guess, to just talk to somebody, at the State Department or USASOC or wherever. Like at least I noticed in myself and I noticed in other medics or even other providers, like we love numbers. Like if I can bend heaven and earth to get a number, like I'm going to do it. I'm not going to talk to the guy because that doesn't mean anything. What does mean something is a digital, a device that gives me a number. That means he's okay. It has nothing to do with him like talking to me.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And that's one thing, like in the course where I work, it's just the concept of sometimes your devices don't tell you the truth. Put your hands on the patient. Like, are they warm? Can you feel a pulse? Does that make sense compared to the number you just got? Any other, the human things that, just life does, how does that compare? Maybe it's a device that's throwing you off.
Right. So we say, well, it would be really nice to be able to see where their hemoglobin's going. What are you going to do with that information? Right? Well, I'd like to know if they're becoming more acidotic or not. Is there any other way that you could determine that? Right? And vital signs are called vital signs because they're vital, right? They are a direct insight into how the body's physiology is compensating or working, right? And so, but understanding that concept, Dennis, comes back to the embracing and the development of clinical judgment, right? And so this is where I come back to the standpoint of going, look, we have we train the best medics in the world, hands down, in the U.S. Special Operations. And they still, for the most part, lack clinical judgment, right? Because although they've read about sailing and studied about sailing and know how to name different clouds, they've never actually had their hand on the tiller of a ship at sea in storm. So they're not really a sailor.
Right? I mean, sometimes it's even at sea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you go to like our MPTs, which can be great, but you're never asked your opinion about a decision or what would you do or what do you have? It's always like, oh yeah, this is patient, this is what's wrong with them, this is what we're going to do today. And unless you're a moron, you just smile and nod, right? Because you probably understand a third of what he just said. But if you want even a hope of doing anything more advanced than stand in a corner, you're going to smile and nod. So, how would you even get an MPT site to be willing to have even somebody who just understands how to make a clinical decision to spend the time to willing to hear whatever garbage is going to come out of this medic's mouth and then develop that clinical decision-making process? Because we got 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And all the residents, all the interns, all the fellows, they have years to develop this before they're just unleashed on the population.
Right. And what they use, and that's a key point, right? So it's interesting when we talk about human subject research or using humans for training, right? And I say, look, in the medical field, we do human subject research all the time. We practice on patients all the time because you're a medical student, right? Or a PA student or a nurse practitioner student, right? And then you go through your residency years and you're always practicing on the patient. But what that gives you is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clinical engagements, right? And you need to know what normal looks like well enough so when you see abnormal, it jumps out at you, right? But if, this comes back to the concept of where does good judgment come from? Good judgment comes from bad experience. You need enough total experiences in your life where some of them are bad, and then you can't be sheltered or protected or insulated from the repercussions of those bad experiences. And then you kind of go, okay, I'll never forget that. But you're right. If you only have 2 weeks or 4 weeks, right? So that for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, we had to fight for that as a minimum. That doesn't mean that's the best, right? But it is because commanders and other people, right? You just have, you're the medic, but we really want you to know how to use the mortar and go to sniper school. Okay? I should be capable of those things, but I should be the expert in medicine, right? And too often we leave it to the individual medic to kind of go, well, where do you want to go, right?
Or even the medic himself, you fight that battle.
Yeah.
When he's a staff sergeant, right? One, he doesn't know what right is supposed to be. He's just happy to be there. And you're talking to commander, like, yeah, good luck. He's going to tell you, shut up, go stand over there, and the conversation's over.
Right.
And that's kind of almost revisiting what the first question when we started this podcast was operational, medical. Like, we got to get on the same page.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you expect out of these guys?
And so I would submit then, coming full circle, that in the operational force, our biggest roadblock is not the White Tower. Our biggest roadblock is our own command element that is unwilling to recognize that our range time is in a clinical setting, right? And so if I told the group commander, well, guess what? We can only send the ODAs to range, a shooting range, or explosives range, or CQB 2 weeks every 2 years, or 4 weeks every 4 years. What do you think their response would be? So again, I think that's a really important point that we've come full circle to. I don't think our enemy is the White Tower. Right?
No. That, and I hope I didn't imply that at all. I think the enemy is either miscommunication or lack of communication,
or lack of priorities, right? So, and the right. So this is an area where, in general, commanders who have been to war and had people that were injured and saw the value of good medical care will make it a priority, right? So when, right, this was famously what happened in the 75th Ranger Regiment when Stan McChrystal, as a colonel, became the regimental commander. Prior to him getting there, the big three in the regiment were shoot, move, and communicate. When Stan McChrystal took over, and after a time, he changed it to shoot, move, communicate, and medicate. He put an emphasis on medical training. And that, because it had the command emphasis, changed the whole dynamic, which is why, quite frankly, in the Ranger Regiment, now, yes, it's essentially the size of one group, Special Forces group, but that's why their medical training and sustainment training is so high above just about every other special operations platform, because the commander has said this is important, right? You got all kinds of people, as a medic, how often are you going to the range to shoot?
Once a week.
Yeah.
Maybe more.
How often is the 18 Bravo doing medical training?
When we make him.
Right? So, but it's because of the lack of priority, right? And these are all, right? Why do I keep coming back to this? Because when you're in LISCO, it's the team's ability to have all of the basics down really, really well, right? So when the Bravo is the only person with any medical skill looking over you as the Delta, right?
Which has happened.
When you say, you got to do this, they actually know what the hell that means, right?
And that's happened. Like, that's not even far-fetched.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know, that was kind of a kind of up and down, back and forth, weaving kind of discussion that we had. I think there's value in that. And really the 30,000 foot perspective is, okay, but don't sprint to failure. Remember that if the real difficulty in LISCO is the inability to depend on other people to come out and help you, then you have got to be able to help yourself, right? And the real means of helping is what information is going to actually make a change in your clinical practice with that patient in front of you, right? So I would submit again, are ultrasounds good? Sure, they got all kinds of value, right? And, but from the ultrasound standpoint, what I would really like to see is the ability for every medic to know how to do very simple, large, whole limb regional blocks, right? So that I don't have to snow the guy, right? I can bandage it, put it up next to him. And if I do that, then if I have two injured guys that are injured kind of badly, but they both have tourniquets on, but because, right, it was a traumatic amputation, but I've done a block and they can't feel as much pain. No, they can talk to each other and monitor each other. And then go, when one of them starts losing it, they can go, hey, I need help over here. Right? The concept of, okay, if blood is that important, where can I get blood from? And what is going to be the trigger for me to draw blood from everybody else? And have I even asked the question, if I've made somebody expectant, have I even talked with them about the idea beforehand about using their blood? Because you've already decided that they are expectant. The question is, how do you make the best of that situation, right? And just that discussion alone brings into the concept of courageous vulnerability. Are you willing to have the discussion about a vulnerable time between teammates and then the individual and their family members, right? We don't have discussions about death in families often because it makes us uncomfortable, right? Our elders are often very interested in death and what's going to happen, but often their kids say, no, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about it. No, we need to talk about that. We have to plan for that. And if we're holding on to somebody and it's truly LISCO, right? and we've done we said, no, we're going to push on this person, and we've used assets, right? Because we said, no, they're not expecting yet. At what point are we comfortable saying, okay, it's time to cut it off? Because we've already pushed a bunch and they're not getting better. Those are the hard clinical decisions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say even at a base level, we don't really scratch it that much, scratch the surface on it. When I was going through the course, all of my scenarios were all built off, if you died, you failed. That's it, period. And at no point in time was it ever okay for you to not know the answer. Just like when the telemedicine stuff started, what was it? Maybe 2014-ish, 15-ish. We had a big meeting about it with the Joint Trauma System, and they're going through like all the greatness of what now became the advisor line. And, I had a dumb question, was at what point in time is the medic going to know it's okay to call? And they're like, well, whenever he doesn't know the answer. It's like, when is that? Because at no point were we ever trained to admit you didn't know the answer. You just keep doing stuff until, somebody else comes and takes them off your hands.
I have met the enemy, and the enemy is me. Right? Yeah. Agreed. And it does take a lot, right? And unfortunately, it's very hard for most people to learn vicariously. So I can stand up in front of them and tell them in these experiences and try to evoke an emotion out of them. But until they live it themselves, right, it's often is really hard for it to sit in them. And this is why spending time on the clinical range, which is in a hospital or in a clinic, is so important. Because you've got to live it, right?
And I think, vice versa, the docs, the PAs, the whomever, the surgeons that are now expecting to get pushed out into the field, like you had better know some like basic survival skills on how to live, because you're probably not going to be able to have that big of a security force around you. Because by very nature, you're going to be a small unit to try to keep you alive, so you don't have a big footprint. I've had a few conversations with different guys. Like, I think doctors who are expected to go into that environment are going to have to get a little bit dirtier than maybe they were used to before.
Yep. And to be honest, the vast majority of them would love it.
What a coincidence. Right? That's where you're going.
Because what it allows them to do is also, right, admit or become vulnerable themselves, right? And, but it gives them a chance to touch the magic, right? Because for them, what's going on in the hospital every day, right? Haloing for the soft guy is like seeing the trauma patient in the hospital. It's a slow Tuesday, right? But now you do that outside of that environment, and now, right? But that's where the learning really happens. I'm not a first responder as the emergency medicine guy or the trauma surgeon in the hospital. At best, I'm a first receiver. So I need to know, no kidding, what is the first responder? And before I start judging them, I should probably try to go do it in their environment, right? Yeah.
I make a joke of it, but I'm a bit serious. If you want to humble a doc, ask him to do an IV. Mm-hmm. Same kind of concept. Things are just different out in the dirt. And what you're capable of doing and a tactical environment is drastically different than what you're capable of doing in an ER bay or an ICU or a surgical bay. It's just different.
It's primarily not because the individual is different, but it's because the environment is different. And the individual has not yet learned how to adapt to the environment. They're just used to adapting the environment. Right? Yeah. So when you say, well, anytime I do a procedure in the hospital, the first thing I should do is maximize my positioning and my comfort in my equipment so it makes it as easy as I can. Well, the same thing happens in the field, right? If I don't have to do an IV in the prone position, I'm not going to, right? I'm going to get the patient, ideally, obviously, out of the kill zone in some place with cover and concealment. And if I can do it standing up or me sitting down, right, with everything laid out, I'm going to do that, right? If I'm racing to put an IV in, right, fumbling, I'm probably not doing the right procedural decision at the right time, right? And rarely has an IV ever saved anybody. So if you're doing this, is the patient really that sick, or are you just that nervous? Yeah.
No, it could go either way. You're talking blood? It could go either way.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we've hit D of our DImE acronym. You mentioned like information, economic. Is there any different points than just having just good communication and finding out who are the players in that environment?
So this is going to sound like no shit, Sherlock. However, and it's because what we claim that we can do, at least in the Special Forces community, right, is in the Special Forces community, right, this not the Rangers and it's not the pararescue men, but it is in the civil affairs folks, right, and the PSYOPs folks, is that we need to make sure that we respect cultural traditions, right, and any engagement we look to partake in is that we work by, with, and through the local population, right? So, yes, you should talk with the GCC and the people up in the platoon of foreign area officers who have made the country plan, and then talk with the defense attaché that's in the embassy. However, after that's done, when you get on the ground, you actually talk with the leadership that's there. So you know what you're tasked to do, but now you want to find out what is culturally okay to do and where the red lines are. And that really means don't sprint into training. Sit down for a few days and have a meal with them. Ask about their families. People are more similar than they are different, right? And so it's about developing that sense of a bond that you're not just there from a transaction. Even if you know and they know that you're only going to be there for 2 weeks. You want to instill in them the sense that you give a shit, right? And they are important. And they hold the high ground because it's their country, right? And your solutions should not be U.S.-based solutions. They should be solutions that are sustainable at the local level, right? It's basics.
Yeah, it is basics. And obviously we overlook basics all the time because newer and better is always better. But
Right.
is there, when it comes to DImE, when it comes to interactions, obviously this conversation can go on and on and on and on. But is there any, if you had to either do this presentation again or speak specifically to somebody who's going out the door, what advice would you give them?
Never go someplace for the first time. Probably the biggest 30,000 foot perspective is that in general, the U.S. military has got a 50-day time horizon, whereas the State Department and USAID and other development or the agencies in the U.S. government who work on development have a 50-year strategy. And that mental transition from 50-day to how do I fit in a 50-year is probably the biggest bit of advice that I could give you when you go into a foreign nation and you're working with them, right? So if it's under LISCO, you're just trying to survive, but you still got to understand how do you do things, right? And you have to fight the tendency to bring your U.S. standards along with you, right? Because if the only medications that you can get when you're in country for resupply are what are locally available, and that comes by giving somebody money to go downtown, that's not going to be you going downtown. You're going to find somebody who's already got an account there or has got a relationship, right? And you just got to get comfortable enough using those medications, right? And you can't say, well, I can't use these because they're not FDA approved. They're not your patients. They're local patients, or they are your patients in the U.S., right? But if the host nation is one that we've been working with for a while, ideally, we've done a little bit of recon from that element as well. But so I guess I would say is get out of the 50-day time horizon, look at the 50-year time horizon, how you're engaging. If it's really going to be combat operations or we're training for combat operations, then we must go into those nations before the LISCO happens and understand how their civilian healthcare network functions and how we would plug into it. We would not be recreating our own. Even if we went in large scale numbers to support Poland, right? Or Latvia or Lithuania, it would be the height of inefficiency and ineffectiveness to say we're going to set up our own hospital system. We need to go into that system and understand how it works before we ever go there, because that's how the host nation is going to take care of their patients. And likely that's how our patients, our American service members, if they're injured, they're going to flow through that same casualty chain, because we won't have the benefit of having a unique U.S. casualty chain, right? So, right, go into those systems. And I'm thinking, right, if you're talking LISCO, who are the people that we are going to be fighting? If you're really going to say LISCO, it's going to be Russia. Okay, well, then you better go into those European countries and work inside their hospitals. If nothing else, develop the relationship to say, how does it work? How do I plug into you? Where do I put liaison officers regularly? And how do we exercise this? Right? If it's going to be Taiwan, then ideally we're doing that in Taiwan. Right? If it's going to be in Korea, then, right, that should be going on in Korea. I go back to the point that think about how much we fail at that particular concept. The United States entered Germany 75 years ago as a conquering force. And under the Marshall Plan, we essentially have remained an armed occupation until now and set up systems that helped U.S. service members. And so what we did was we made our own system, but through all of that, even to this day, U.S. medical personnel don't have the authority or the knowledge how to go into German health systems and work side by side with them in case Germany gets invaded and we have to move casualties through Germany. We just have Landstuhl. Well, what if Landstuhl gets bombed? Right? Think about it. That's what the U.S. has done from the medical standpoint and their strategic engagement in 75 years under NATO, where we knew we were linked arms. So that strategic failure from a medical standpoint, and when we talk about a joint trauma system, it better be the combined joint trauma system, right? Multiple nations. And we are the guest in their house. So we better learn how to use manners in their house. That's probably the best guidance I could give them.
No, I think that's some wise words. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed it. Maybe we can do this again.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for what you do, because you're constantly trying to pry the hard truth out of the kind of solidified shell that we all get comfortable underneath. And we need to crack that regularly to ask the hard questions. Is our ability over only veneer deep? Or do we have depth to our understanding and our adaptability?
That's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC Podcast, out.